Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to talk about libertarian free will. Libertarian free will is essentially the opposite of strict determinism. Strict determinism would say that we're not in control of our choices, that free will doesn't exist. Usually the explanation is because of causality, and so they say that the only reason why, for instance, you're watching this video right now is because a series of events led to you, a series of events that was out of your control led to you watching the video. Libertarian free will, however, is pretty much the exact opposite because it says that we have complete control and complete freedom and that free will does exist and that it's independent of cause and causality. So, and essentially they would say this because of volition and because of volition existing, according to the people that would believe in libertarian free will. So this would include people like Kane, Sartre, and others. So now, I'm not really going to talk about determinism because I think that it's irrelevant to this discussion. It would normally seem like it would be appropriate because I would need to talk about determinism in order to prove the importance of libertarian free will. I'm actually not going to worry about that, however, though I will say that one reason why I don't like to subscribe to the notion of determinism in its really strict sense is because it would seem to me that it's very limiting to our cognition, and if you're aware of kind of some of my thoughts, you would be aware that I hate any kind of limitations on our cognition, and just believing in these notions of determinism limits our cognition, or at least has the potential to do so, while libertarian free will has the potential to really stretch our cognition. And so I will say that that's one reason why I reject determinism, at least in its strict sense. Now, you might be wondering why I support this view, and so one of the things that's important to keep in mind about those who believe in libertarian free will is this whole notion that they care a lot about responsibility and acknowledging the consequences of our actions and acknowledging what we have done, and the like. And so responsibility is very important to this idea, and so of libertarian free will. And so I'm definitely a proponent and supporter of libertarian free will, not just because I'm a fan of Sartre, but because I think that once we can acknowledge our actions, I think that so in all honesty, I think that it takes a lot of bravery to acknowledge our actions. I think that one of the biggest problems with determinism is that it limits our feelings of responsibility for something that we have done. And this essentially gives us a free pass, even if only cognitively. So it may not in terms of what our actions do towards other people, so we may get thrown in jail for doing something, but maybe in terms of our own well-being, we might think that, well, I just did this because of X, Y, and Z. And so it basically gets us off the hook. But with libertarian free will, we're forced to be responsible, we're forced to confront what we have done. And this is why I'm an advocate of libertarian free will, because I think that it's very important that we be responsible for our actions and that we care about what we do and that we think very consciously about our actions and the things that we do. And so I think that that's extremely important to keep in mind. And so to kind of illustrate why this is important, I want to talk a little bit about Sartre's claim that he had never felt more free than whenever he had a gun to his head during World War II, whenever Paris was being occupied. Pretty sure it was Paris. And essentially it's a very powerful claim, and what he's saying is that he realized in that moment that he had a moment to choose. He had the ability and freedom to choose. And he realized this freedom, and I think that this is one of the reasons why a person might come to radically start believing in libertarian free will is, for example, in these extreme situations where we realize we have to be free and we have to make a decision now and we have to be responsible for that decision no matter what happens. And so I think all of that is extremely important. And that's pretty much why I advocate for libertarian free will. Now I will admit that one of the problems with libertarian free will is this whole notion of existential arrogance. And so the problem with existentialism is we tend to have this idea and belief that we're in complete control of ourselves. Now, without going too much into Buddhism, there's this idea of dependent origination, and this is the idea that everything is interconnected and that everything does have a cause, and that we didn't get to be the way that we were without causes. And so, in a sense, this is a kind of determinism. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that I subscribe fully to dependent origination, though I would say that I like its idea in terms of trying to strip out the ego. And so existentialism, on the other hand, would be the opposite in a sense, because it would have this very arrogant attitude in a sense that because I'm in control of my actions, I'm in control of everything that I've done, and I'm a self-contained unit, and that it's simply me. And so the problem with existentialism is that it does indeed have this arrogance because of its emphasis on the ego. However, I think sometimes that is a misappropriation and misunderstanding of these concepts of existentialism, because existentialism is really about being responsible for your actions, and it's not about being arrogant, though I can still kind of see why it would be arrogant in the sense that we don't acknowledge other causes, we overassert our own freedoms, and sometimes we have the tendency to overassert those freedoms on other people and to push them on other people, and that's not fair. And so in that sense, I can definitely see one of the problems with this idea of libertarian free will. And so while I wouldn't necessarily say that the arrogance is unfounded, because I think it just comes as a consequence of believing in libertarian free will, I think that we should do our best to try to mediate between the arrogance and the humility, and I think we can do that by thinking of this idea of dependent origination and thinking about how everything is interconnected, and yet that being compatible with freedom. And so that's kind of a difficult position to take, and a difficult idea to stomach just because, or to apply, just because life is very, very complex. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't necessarily try to apply that. Now, what does all of this lead me to? Well, it's been leading me to an argument that I've been trying to formulate for a while, and this is going to be my own argument, but it's going to be an important one to help establish why I really, really emphasize libertarian free will. Now, again, I just want to say that this, of course, doesn't mean that I don't think that causes don't play a role into our decisions, that there aren't other factors that play a role into our decisions, but I think for the most part, libertarian free will is very useful, at least in terms of thinking about our freedom and in terms of thinking about our responsibility. And so this leads me to a certain argument that I'm going to try to lay out before you. And so the idea that I've been wrestling with for a while is this whole idea that essentially everything comes down to a conception. Everything comes down to a concept. So this would be whether it's knowledge, truth, or even our beliefs. And so the problem that I was running up against was I felt that I always had to justify knowledge, or my knowledge. I always had to justify my belief. I always had to justify my truth. And this was getting really frustrating because I was talking to a lot of other people, encountering other sources, and they were positing their truths, they were positing their knowledge, they were positing their beliefs, and they would run counter to a lot of what I believed and what I felt to be true and the like. And I was starting to really go too far in this, going too far and too extreme in my idea of epistemic humility, which is epistemic humility as the idea that we're humble about our knowledge because we acknowledge that there may be things that we don't know. But I was going too far in that way because none of this knowledge that I was encountering was leading to action on my end. None of this truth, these supposed truths that I was hearing from other people, was leading to some kind of action on my end. And that was basically leading me to a kind of halt, to a kind of standstill. Now, this doesn't mean that I wasn't acting, but I wasn't necessarily owning up to my actions. And part of the reason, pretty much the main reason, was because I felt that everything came down to a conception. So I felt that my action was nothing more than a conception. My action due to a knowledge was nothing more than a conception because the knowledge itself was nothing but a conception. It was nothing but a concept. And all of that was very, very problematic. as you can imagine, for a lot of reasons. Because whenever you think that everything is an idea, it can be very limiting to the other side of existence, the other side of the coin, which would be action. And so if we believe that our actions are just simply ideas, then we're basically in a lot of trouble. And so this is why I started thinking seriously about libertarian free will. And so the argument would go as follows, very loosely. The idea is that the problem before was that I was thinking that knowledge and truth and our beliefs needed to be justified and they needed to be proven. I finally rejected that claim because I didn't care, because I realized that I did not need to care about the truth value of my knowledge or truths or beliefs. I didn't have to worry about any of that. I didn't have to justify any of it. But what I needed to justify was my convictions. And so what this leads to is this idea that we can have our convictions as long as we can justify them, but we must do two things. We must acknowledge that those convictions might be wrong, but that's okay because we're going to be accountable for our actions. We're going to be responsible for our actions. And the other part of it is this idea that essentially we have our convictions and we must allow ourselves to have our convictions because that is what allows ourselves to act and to make decisions and to hopefully make really impacting decisions. And so that was a little messy, I'll admit, but that's pretty much how the argument would go. And essentially the conclusion would be this whole notion that you're allowing yourself to have convictions as long as you can justify them, and even if you can't justify them, as long as you just feel it's right. So you could even go off an intuitive sense and just say, this feels right to me and so I'm going to do it. Now, of course, all this is very abstract. So how would this work in practice? Well, I think that's a valid question. That's something that I'm still working through. I don't have any solid examples. Though I will say that in my life, I've been thinking of examples where I've done this unconsciously and accidentally. And so it's definitely something that is important to think about because we make decisions all the time, we make actions all the time, and when we can make an action without worrying too much about the consequences per se, but being accountable to the consequences, then I think it opens us up to a lot of things that we normally wouldn't be able to do and feel. And this is naturally a consequence of believing in libertarian free will, which is placing emphasis on our freedoms as individuals and as moral agents. And yeah, so just to close, I would say that I think that all of this is important for thinking about the importance of conviction. So essentially, my final claim would be this idea that things such as knowledge, truths, and beliefs lead to conviction, and conviction leads to action. And actions and convictions are highly intertwined and intertwined and connected. And because they are, essentially, they can justify each other and they can exist dependently and codependently, and they can originate together. And I think that's important for escaping this kind of gridlock where we think that everything that we do is just an idea and that it has no consequence. And so essentially what I want to do is I want to reassert myself back into life by drawing attention to this, the importance of conviction and the importance of libertarian free will, and thinking about the importance of our actions and what that does and how we can't just see it as an idea. So sure, people might disagree with our actions, and sure, our actions might be wrong, but as long as we have the conviction to back up those actions, we should be okay. And as long as we're using knowledge appropriately and truths appropriately and beliefs appropriately to be able to justify those convictions, we should be good. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.